Welcome to Anything But Ordinary with your host, Spooky and Raven. Tonight we're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, one of the eeriest unsolved mysteries in Russian history. I'm Spooky, and here's your other awesome host, Raven. Hello, Raven.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good tonight. How are you?
Whew, little burnt out, just a long day, but I'm definitely enjoying the new spring weather, that's for sure.
Oh, it's been great here. Just absolutely been great.
Right.
We've been up into the 60s.
Yeah, actually today I think we got up near 60, so it's kind of like, woohoo, exciting. But you know, here we can always get snow at any minute.
No, that's true. Just give it 5 minutes, the weather will change.
Right.
The Dyatlov Pass incident, like I said, was one of the eeriest unsolved mysteries in Russian history. This is a mystery that has baffled the world for more than half a century. Since the night of February 2nd, 1959, in the northern Ural Mountains, 9 experienced Russian ski hikers, experts in extreme cold weather, hiking and camping, died from unexplainable, horrific causes. Now, we thought about sharing some photos, but we decided against it because, 1, Raven and I are not into gore, and 2, we thought maybe the photos would be just a little bit disturbing for some of our viewers and listeners. So we're going to post a link later for those of you who are interested.
Right, well, we're sharing some photos, just not of the bodies.
Just not the gory ones.
Yeah, not the bodies and stuff. But there's definitely this website that we had found that this person put a lot of in-depth work into it that, you know, for those of you who after listening to us kind of talk about it, can go and try to figure out the mystery yourself. But, like, I think the first part of that show, I would kind of want to kind of give you guys detail about the 10 hikers and give a little bit of detail on their characters so you kind of get an understanding of who they are and whatnot. And then we're going to tell a little bit of the story, or their, the trek that they took, you know, starting from the school all the way to where this incident had happened. So
Right.
We're going to be reading a little bit, and then afterwards me and Spooky are going to go into detail and bantering back and forth of what our theories are and what our thoughts are when it came to this tragedy, really. So
Now, this is one of those mysteries that the more you read on it and the more you start to research it, you just get pulled in. This was one of the more interesting topics that I've researched.
Oh yeah, I feel like I haven't got enough.
I don't think we're even going to scratch the surface tonight.
Yeah, I don't think we even have enough time in the show to really get all of it in there. But we're definitely going to get their story in for sure, because I feel that that's a big important part, you know, for sure.
Right.
So basically, in January of 1959. 10 Ural Polytechnical Institute students, 8 men and 2 women, planned to do a trek to the northern Ural to a Torton Mountain, which was basically like 6.2 miles away from the incident. Now, they were going to go to a Torton Mountain, and then they were going to go back to Vizhai on February 12th, and then from there they were supposed to telegraph their UPI hiking club and let them know that they made the trek okay and that they were coming back. Now, the route that they had planned back then was considered like a class 3, which is like, this was like in the 50s, so it's, very difficult. It's not like you're, I'm just going to go, like how me and you have like a light hobby or whatever. This is like a serious, extremely hard trek, So it wasn't just like a jaunt through the woods, but the 10 hikers were Igor Dyatlov, and he was he was 23 years old. He was like a radio major, and his character, what they said about him, he was like a great guy. He'd never leave anybody behind. He was always helpful, extremely funny, like to always kind of goof off or whatever. And what they said was just sometimes when he was leading a group, his demeanor would change a little because he'd kind of become very hard and domineering. over some of the past hikes that he kind of led, and a lot of people didn't really appreciate that. You know, but other than that, he was like a great guy and would always do stuff for people.
Perhaps he did that to make sure that everybody lived through it.
On his other hikes? Oh, yeah, some people just take charge. Now, but he was a great guy. He was very funny. He was always there. He was extremely strong and athletic, you know, and, you know, very skilled in hiking. It wasn't his first time out doing long expeditions and stuff. And the second... Oh, well, wait, I should just throw up the picture while I'm doing this. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? I totally gapped out on that. I apologize to those who are listening. Now, the first one, like I said, is Igor. And the second one is Zinda Magorov. Now, she was 21 years old, and she was a radio major as well. And now, the way people described her, because I got this information from listening to actual friends that had did videos and documents out there, and they said that she was very athletic, you know, beautiful, optimistic, always loved life, extremely friendly and outgoing, always very helpful, you know. And they considered her like the engine of their hiking group, our club, at the whole school. You know, like she just ran everything and made sure everything was smooth when they were planning and doing all that stuff. And then the third person was Yuri George Krivoshenko. Now, he was 24 years old. He was a civil engineer student, and the way that they described him, he was a very friendly guy, extremely strong and strong endurance, and you know, like the rest of them, would go out of his way to help a lot of people as well. And then the fourth person was Simon Zoltarov. Now, he wasn't a student. He was actually the oldest one in the whole group. He was 37 years old, and now he was a professional guide on many on this one mountain. I can't say the name, so I apologize. But he also lived on that hiking base. So he was constantly up in the mountains, understood the terrains, you know, and was a guide for those who were in training and learning how to do that stuff. So, you know, he was extremely professional, has done it for a long time. He was also a World War II vet. Now, the fifth one was Yuri Yendin. Now, he was 21 years old at the time. Now, this was the guy. He didn't make the whole trek. He actually turned around because he had gotten sick and had blisters on his feet, and you know, his leg was bothering him. So he made it halfway through the trek, and then he went back home. And he died later on April 27th in 2013. And he was also very strong and athletic and had done many long ski hikes as well. Now, the sixth person is Alexander Kolatov, and he was 21 years old. He was a technical physics major, and the way that they described his personality, he was like a funny guy and really well liked and super strong hiker. Now, the weird thing about this guy, his is the only diary that was missing that they couldn't find, and what they think is what they say was his was never made public. Excuse me, it was found, but it was never made public, and it was rumored by a drunken military man one time. The real reason why his stuff wasn't, his camera and his diary wasn't published, is because his diary it was more detailed and gave the real reason for the tragedy. And then number 7 was Rustam Slobodin. He was 22 years old, and he was a mechanical engineer. And he was like one of those extremely very well-balanced guys, super strong, had a calm personality, never despondent in any given situation, right? And then number 8 was Nikolai Thibault Brignoles. He was 24 years old. He was a civil engineer major. Now, they described his character as, you know, extremely upbeat, fun, loved life, got along with everybody, was very optimistic, you know, went out of his way to cheer people up. And he already had, like, a very hard life as it was, but everything he just always overcame, never let it get the best of him. This is things that their friends talked about on their characters. Now, number 9 was Yuri Dorsenko. He was 21, a radio engineer as well. Now, he kind of had an impulsive personality. This is what his friends were saying. And he was famous at the school hiking club because one time when they were on a trek, he went running after a giant bear with one of those GLS hammers. but it just shows you that he, wasn't afraid of anything.
He wasn't. In other words, he had more courage than common sense.
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to state that because I don't know, but he was extremely a brave person. You know what I mean? Something was coming up after them. He took charge, and just kind of shows on his character that he's not easily frightened or any of them so far. And then basically the last one, number 10, was Ludmille Dubin. Now she was 23 years old, and she was also a civil engineer major. She was, more of the moral type person and very nice and caring and went out of her way for people too. But one time on one of her old hikes, her friends had said she injured her leg severely that she had to be carried out by the hikers. And during that time, she showed such extraordinary stoic to overcome mental and physical difficulties that they were so impressed by her strong endurance through that excruciating pain that she was, she just impressed everybody. It's like everybody else was complaining, but she was just in so much pain because, her leg was just messed up, but she acted like it was no big deal and was, encouraging those who were bringing her down. So right there, that shows you she has a very strong character, even through the worst situations and the worst pain, So basically, all these hikers in this group are considered the strongest of all hikers and mountain expeditioners from their school and from the town that they were from. And like in the 50s, hiking wasn't like a hobby, but like a way of life back then. You know what I'm saying? Not like today we're like, oh, let's go cross-country skiing. That's nothing compared to what these guys did in Russia, It's just like a way of life. And they were all extremely experienced on long ski tours and mountain expeditions, and all of them had made several of them throughout their life. You know what I mean?
So this was not their first expedition
or trek, if you want to call it trek. Yeah, no.
I'll get it out here in a minute.
That's okay. There's just so much to cover tonight. But yeah, I kind of gave a little characteristic on their personalities and kind of wanted you to know their ages so that you knew, one, they were in good condition. They were all athletic and super strong. None of them were spooked or scared easy. They were always there to help another one, And even when some of them got extremely hurt severely bad on other past mountain hikes, they didn't show like it bothered them. So I just kind of wanted everybody to know a little idea of who each one of them were as we go into the story, so that you can recall that as we're telling the story. Right?
Right.
All right. So what I'm going to do a little bit is I'm basically going to read a couple parts out of their journal, which kind of explains their trip and how they felt leading up to the incident, which is only a couple of them. Because what they did is they wrote like every single day, the day that they left, all the way up to the day of the incident. And then
these people seem to have kept a thorough journal of their entire trip up until the incident.
Yep, they did.
Wasn't the last entry something like the night before all of this happened, or maybe the day of?
Right, and
but the incident itself is not in the journals,
except for what I had said earlier in that one guy's, Alexander's, his diary was never made public, nor his camera.
Right.
Now, the military kept that, and they still are not releasing his, which, makes people wonder. Because he's Yuri Yundin, his friend that went back, was the one that said that he was the one who kept great detail. Oh, actually, 2 journals are missing. His, it's not missing, but they're kept private. His and the group diary, right? Those two
right.
are
the one that actually survived all of this, after he died, his journal suddenly just disappeared. No one could find it.
Right. So, but basically, Alexander Kolotov's, his diary, his photos, and the group's diary were kept from the public, and the military to this day are still not releasing it, and the Russians who are working on still trying to solve this from the town and other areas out there are, pressuring Russia, the military, to reopen this case because they want the truth, Now, the first entry that, well, first the group arrived by train in the northern province of, I'm sorry, I'm going to mess this word up, Sverdlovsk, I can't even say that town, but they arrived.
Hey, it's Russian.
I'm trying my best. At least I got their names right. But their first diary entry that I got was on January 24th, and they arrived in that town. Now, they weren't treated very well in this small part of the town. The police didn't even allow them into the train station. And now, like I said, they all had really fun-loving spirits and whatnot. And, you know, they were singing and enjoying their trip the whole time they were going. Well, while they were standing outside the station, Yuri K. started to sing a song for fun, and they arrested him and took him away for a little while. Which, just because he was singing, and Zena in the diary said this is the first small town they ever know that you could get arrested for singing a song, you know. And so later on, while they were staying in the town waiting for the next train to go, they went and visited a school nearby where the children kept asking them all these questions, and they're like extremely inquisitive, and asked them to show them all their gear. And she said it was time for them to catch the train, and as they were heading back to the train, the school children followed them and were begging and pleading with them to stay and not to go. And they became extremely attached to Zinda and begged her not to go on the hike, to stay behind and be their school leader. And they were in tears, telling her they would listen to her and they'd study well as they followed them all the way to the train before they departed. Now, this was taken on the diary entry out of Zena's on January 24th. Which I find interesting because it seems like throughout the diary parts that I'm reading, it almost like the one dude was just arrested, you know, and the school kids were begging her to stay. So it makes you wonder, you know, if something was trying to stop them from going, like something higher above was trying to say, hey, you know, just trying to, you know.
Raven, your sound went just a little bit crazy there. A lot of static.
Well, I don't know what to do now, so if it's still good now. Maybe.
Keep talking.
Okay, well.
No, not bad. It's getting better.
All right. Well, then, you know, they hopped on a train from there, and then what they did is they went from there and they ended up in Evdal. And then from Evdal, on January 25th, they took a truck to the village of Vishai, and that's like the last inhabited settlement that far north, right? So they said in one of their diaries entries there were about 20 abandoned houses, and only like one was good enough, like a fireplace that they could use and stay in overnight before they started their trek to the Mount, you know, Mount Torten, right? So, and they were also waiting for the horse to catch up that had their gear and stuff. Now, the next morning, they started out on their trek towards Atorten from Vishai on January 27th. And now, during January 27th, that's when Yuri Yundin was forced to go back because of illnesses, blisters, and like leg issues. Now, the group right at this point consists of 9 people, right? So that's how we got our 9. Now, on January 30th, Igor Dyatlov, in his diary, he wrote, at the bottom in the tent is very nice, but on the mountain, on the slope, it is bad and windy. The temps are about -30 to -50 degrees. So that was basically one of his last entries that he had on his. Now, on February 1st, in the diary, it said, today is Kalatov's birthday. Congrats to him. As a present, they gave him a mandarin, which he immediately split into 8 parts and shared with everybody. But Ludmil, she went into the tent and didn't come out until the end of dinner. In all, 1 more day passed safely. Zena. Now, that was the last of all the diary entries. And since they wrote daily, it leads one to assume the tragedy either happened that night between the 1st and or the 2nd of February of 1959. So now we know that they are up on the mountain, and, you know, they were, during this whole time, during their different diary stuff that I was reading, none of them got in a fight. They were all happy. They were always singing. They were always laughing. They were talking about stuff, friendship and this and that. You know, so that's about it. Spooky?
I'm listening. Your sound did cut out a little bit. Now we're going to get to the incident.
Well, yeah, I'm just wanting to know if you were going to talk a little bit after what I just said, or do you want me to go on to a little bit of when the search party came? Because I have the part with do you have the show playing on in the background? Because I hear myself talking.
No, but your sound was cutting out and you were cutting out. So we had little problems with sound there for a little bit while you were reading the diary.
Yeah,
so
I know, but everybody's saying that's fine now, so...
Yeah, I had to refresh, so... And it says that you are echoing.
Yeah, because I'm hearing myself come through your end, so...
How's it sound now?
I don't hear myself now, so you turn down, it's good. Well,
good.
But I was just wondering if you wanted to make any comments on the entries that I read so far of this leading up to this point, or would you like me to go on and explain now what the search party from their story?
I think we should go on to the search party.
All right. Now, this is what I wrote down, and this is what I'm getting information directly from the people that were involved in the search party. Now, it wasn't until the 19th and the 20th of February when a small group of hikers, like a search party, which consisted of their friends, where 3 people were dropped off at Mount Torten, because that's where they were expecting them to be, was a radio man, a hiker, and Morrissey. Now, Morrissey was like one of their great friends. Now, Morrissey and Peter were 2 people that were actually supposed to go on the trek as well, but Peter couldn't get out of school because he had his pre-graduation studies and the head major wasn't going to let him go, and Morrissey was also supposed to go on this trek, but he couldn't get off of work. So those 2 were also spared, like Yuri Yundin when he went back home. Now, Morrissey went to help find his friends with 2 other people. Now, they were looking for the ski trail as an AN-2 plane flew over also at the same time. Now, during their first search, they would put the letter P down to let the plane that they hadn't found anything yet. They hadn't found the trail or anything. Well, during that time, the plane came back and dropped off this, photograph canister with a red flag on it. And when they opened it, it basically said that Dyatlov's group's equipment was found south of them. So the 3 of them were picked up, Morrissey, the radio man, and the other hiker, all from the school, were picked up and then dropped off by the valley where they met up with another small another search party group. And they all started, who were already following the Dyatlov's trail. So they just joined in with them. And as they approached the storage shed where Dyatlov's group left supplies for the trek back before they made the summit attempt to Torten, the party and Morrissey's group followed the trail path into the valley of the river. Actually, I have a little photo, so I'll show you guys so you can kind of see a little bit of what we're talking about. There's this little thing on stilts is the storage shed where they stored the rest of their food to make the trek back. And then they were heading up. Now, when they were heading up over the valley and we were coming up over the peak is when they noticed the green tent, and that was about 3,540 feet from the summit where they were supposed to be. And they were on the east shoulder of Mount Ural, right? So the part of the tent that was facing down the slope was the part that was torn to shreds. And then in front of the tent, the search party noticed they saw a pair of bound skis, and then inside the tent entrance was the furnace, the canteen of alcohol, a bucket, a saw, a hatchet, and some cameras. Now, on the far corner was the map bag, Igor's camera, Zena's diary, and money can. And then right of the entrance was the provisions and 2 pairs of shoes, and then on the opposite side was 6 more pairs of shoes. And in the rear of the tent was a log that they brought over from a previous camp, and they had all their backpacks like laid down on the ground, right?
Right.
And they had cotton jackets and blankets on top of that. I can hear myself echoing again. And some blankets were laid...
I didn't touch it.
Anyway, some blankets were laid out, and some of them were still folded up and had dry clothing on top of it. And then near the entrance, there was dry bread strewn about on the blankets and some food. So basically, we know so far is that the tent was torn in 2 places, but from the inside, it was cut from the inside. And 2, the shoes and clothes and everything was left inside right there. Easy access to grab. Now, the search party, they started to like look around and they spotted a single cedar tree and they headed in that direction and saw footprints. There they found the two Yuris, Yuri Dorchenko and Yuri K, or he liked to go by George, under the tree wearing just long johns and undershirts, and they were also near a fire that had melted down into the snow. And now 16 feet to 20 feet up, the tree branches were tore off, basically very just, it was hard, when you're you don't barely have any clothing on, you have bare hands, the temperature is like -50, right? And they're freezing, and they're jumping, they're climbing these things off. That's hard work to break that stuff with your bare hands in freezing temp,
Yes, it is. Very much.
Now the group left, now when the group saw them, they left the bodies and went down to the valley, and that's where they radioed in for more backup to come, and because they didn't want to contaminate the scene, because right then they knew something was wrong, So later on, a large army tent came up and was put up, and about 40-some people were there. A couple of them were, military policemen from the prison. Some of them were other students. Some were people who were experienced hiker, other experienced hikers. And some of them were special case prosecutors and investigators. Now,
and some of them were military, right?
Yeah, that's right. No, military prison police.
Okay.
Now, this is what I'm reading from what their friends had stated, okay?
Okay.
I'm not trying to talk Russian, I'm just talking in general, trying to read their names. It's not easy. Now, they headed back up, and when they were heading back up, they discovered between the cedar tree and the tent is when they found Igor Dyatlov. His arm was sticking up and they spotted his blue sweater. Well, not that far from there, a dog found Zina, right? And then soon after that, the body of Rustam was found. Now, all these three bodies were kind of like in a row, heading up towards the tent, but they were in distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the tree. Now, these were the first set of the bodies were flown to Evdel, the nearest little town nearby, on May 5th, and they were sent later on to the first town that they arrived in by the train station. Now, one of the head people there, his name was Vladimir. He was a prosecutor, investigator, and an orderly of Evdel. Now, he kind of worked a little bit on the bodies, but they did an interview of him, and this is what he said, stating from his words, Vladimir. First group was found without any bodily injuries, what made me suspicious that no one allowed into the morgue. He also said that the KGB was guarding the morgue and wouldn't let anybody in except for certain people. And Vladimir packed the brains and the tissues for the postmortem to send them out for testing. And he also said on a side note in that interview that the government commission that night had a big booze party in town. I don't know. They were all really offended by the fact that these military people were just partying it up instead of taking this thing serious, right? Now that's the first.
Well, it's the military.
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to say that all military people.
Well, it's not the military; it's the Russian government.
Yeah. Now that was the first. What was that? 1, 2, 3, 4 bodies. Now, they didn't find the. No, that's 5. The first 5 bodies they found had basically, this is what they shortened it up, but they said it was internal bleeding, some scratches, abrasions, and, coagulated blood. And basically, Yuri D. and George K. were dressed in, their underwear under the cedar tree. And Yuri D., he had a burnt sole and hair on the right temple, and Georgie had burnt on his shin that was 10 by 4 inches long. He had a pretty good burn. Rustam had a skull crack that was 2.5 inches in length with a gap of, 1 centimeter wide. And all 5 of them had 3rd to 4th degree frostbite. So they basically...
They all had these internal injuries, but there were no outside injuries.
Well, just little scratches and whatnot, but nothing serious.
Little scratches and whatnot, but nothing that would explain the extent of these serious internal injuries.
Well, right, exactly. And they basically, the government, like I said, the KGB wasn't letting anybody in. They were extremely secretive about this. And they weren't letting any information out, right? And they basically said they died of frostbite. The end.
Right.
So these first bodies were sent back town, and then they were buried, right? And then the government tried to stop the funeral, you know, letting people know about the funerals. They were ripping down signs, stopping people from talking about it, because they didn't want it to be a big deal. They were trying to just make it not happen. And they said, no, we're taking our own people back, and we're going to bury them in our town, right? And they had over thousands of people come out for the first 5 people's funeral. And everybody was really upset and wanted, you know, the other bodies found, and wanted to know why and what happened, and wanted to know why the military was being so, you know, hard on them and trying to stop this stuff and not giving information, not letting anybody know what was going on, you know. So this is...
Yeah, because eventually the military did come in and basically took over the investigation.
Yeah, and they were basically forcing people to be quiet who were involved, you know, and they were just basically...
But something scared these people enough that they cut their way out of a tent and ran off into the woods, and some of them half naked, just in their underwear. Some were barefoot.
Right. Yeah, some had a couple socks on, a couple things. Now, the bodies of the last 4 were found on May 4th, 75 meters from the cedar tree where the first 2, Yuri D. and George K. was found. Now, they were sent back for, you know, forensic post-mortem examination, right? Now, this is when Vladimir was with at that time when they found the other bodies, right? And so were the other people who went previously, the other friends, Morrissey and, you know, the other ones who were at the first search party. Now, when Vladimir was there, this is what he's stating. This is what happened. He said the medical examiner shrieked, and as Vladimir came running up, he saw the skull was crushed. Also, the second body was crushed. And he also stated, you know, when they were at the morgue, there was 2 big drums of alcohol at the morgue, and after handling any of the items and or the bodies, they had to dump themselves in the alcohol to clean themselves off. They were forced to do that by the KGB and the military, right?
Well, there was a reason for that, too.
But we'll say that. Yeah, but we'll say later why. But he was saying why this is all suspicious. Why are we forced to do this? You know, why is there limited access? Why are none of us allowed to talk about anything? Why are we not knowing the details? I mean, this is just bits of what he's saying in an interview, right? And he is the prosecutor, investigator, and orderly of Evdel. Now, he was a real big dude, you know, higher up in ranks. So It wasn't just some...
He wasn't just some flunky.
Sure, that works.
This was a guy that had authority. This was a guy that barked orders and people jumped.
Right, sort of. But yes. Now, from the autopsy of Nikolai B., he had a dent break of the right base of his skull area, and it was like 3.5 by 3 inches with multiple shards. Now, the break goes through the right side of the temple to the front cranial above the right eye socket. Now, the total skull break was about 6.5 inches, so it was huge, you know. And the cause of death was closed as a multi-shard break at the base of the skull with major internal bleeding to the brain and tissues. This is what the forensic expert had stated, parts of it. Now, this is the weird one. Why only a part of this person's autopsy report came out was Ludmil Dubin. It's like they didn't want everybody to... They just said a couple things and then wouldn't let everybody know the rest of it, you know.
Right.
And you saw her photos. You know the damage that was to her, which, like we said, we're not...
She had a lot of damage to her.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the photo.
Right, and like we said, we're not going to share those. For those of you who are interested later on, Ken will be dropping the link later on. You guys can go and check it out. Now, she had symmetrical rib cage break on the right of the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, and then on the left was the 2nd through the 7th. So she had basically a crushed chest.
Right.
But what they kept out of the autopsy report that I saw is they're not talking about that her eyes were missing. They're not talking that her tongue was missing. They're not talking about all the different cuts and bleeding and whatnot, you know what I mean? So they basically kind of kept hers quiet a little bit, which made more people suspicious. Those who saw the body knew more than what the autopsy people were writing, right?
Right.
Now, Alexander Zoltov, he had the 2nd through the 6th ribs were broken on the right side from the center to the armpit with hemorrhaging into the chest muscle. Now, they say the cause of death was multiple breaks of the front rib cage, which caused by either, great pressure from a fall or a blast of some sort. That's what the forensics expert said on him. Now, with Alexander Kolatov, he didn't have any major injuries. The cause of death and effects, they think, was just cold temps. Now, basically, what we're going to go into now, I'm done reading and kind of giving information of what the search party said, what some of the experts said, what their characters and what we talked about. I'm done reading their journals and all that stuff. Now, me and you are going to kind of banter back and forth here about what our theories are and show a couple of pictures. But the injuries that are the major mystery are the last bodies.
Well, you
that
stop
were
and think
discovered.
about this, though. Every one of them did not have any outside injuries of any significance, but internally they were crushed. That, to me, says that it was some sort of shock wave. And one of the rumors at the time was that the Russians were testing rockets in the area. And I believe they were caught up in a military in a military testing. I think that they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there are a lot of things that didn't even come out in the autopsy reports.
Well,
that were basically hidden.
They're still keeping documents from them, which all these people who are still to this day, after 38, 39 years, still trying to get this case reopened because they want to know the truth. And they kind of have an idea, but everybody has like different theories, But I'm showing the tent right now where you can see the huge slash where they sliced up to get out and leave the place.
One of the theories was that there was an avalanche, but that would not explain why.
Well, here's the picture of where they discovered the tent. This is one of the first photos of the first search party of what they found. And they took pictures. And now you see the ski here, right?
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about. If there was an avalanche, all this stuff would have been knocked down and covered up. And their footprints are still there. That's
it. See, there were footprints leading from the tent into the woods. Now, granted, they disappeared after a certain amount of time, but the wind could have covered them up.
But that was all down.
Snow.
It covered up way down by the tree line.
Right.
But the footprints and everything leading away from the tent were all still there.
So that kind of takes away the theory of the avalanche, because the avalanche would have buried that tent.
Right, and knocked down the ski.
And it would have buried any footprints around it.
Right. And, well, also how they talked about the slope. The slope was a gentle slope, and they don't really get avalanches up there at all.
Right.
It's not very deep.
Plus, there were no avalanches recorded.
Nope. And they have
for the area at that time.
Right, and they had proof of pictures and stuff taken of the area that there was no avalanche caused that occurred. And the snow that's on of the tent now was stuff that kind of blew in over it, but it didn't. All their footprints were still there. And here's a picture that shows them preparing. See, they're digging the hole here, preparing to put the tent there. All these people who are digging are the party, the 9 hikers, right? Now you see the ski that that's got an arrow to, and you see this little ski pole thing. It's sticking out as well. Now, if you look at the picture after, when the search party comes, those 2 things are still up.
Well, all of that snow could have been blown in because there was a blizzard that night. They got a little bit off the trail.
It wasn't a blizzard. It was just windy.
But it was still blowing snow.
Right. A blizzard.
And they did, because visibility was poor, they got off the trail a little bit. So they decided that they were going to make camp and they were going to get back on the trail in the morning. Unfortunately, they didn't make it.
Yeah,
Something happened to them that night.
Yeah, they were only like 3,000, what did I say, 3,540 feet away from Atorten, the summit part that they wanted to be on, and they ended up on Sholet Uhail, which
yeah, well, that's a little bit over half a mile off.
But it was windy and poor visibility, so they decided that, I mean, they weren't lost. They had been up in this area before on different treks.
Right.
So they decided just the best bet was to just camp there and then.
Oh yeah, when they realized that they were off their I don't know what to call it, when they were off their trail, off their coordinates.
Right.
They stopped. They didn't keep going. They stopped. They made camp. They were going to wait it out till morning because there were high winds. There was a lot of blowing snow. Visibility was very, very poor. So they stopped. They made camp. And then in the morning, when it was light, they were going to go back and get back on track.
Right, and then continue on with the rest of their planned trek. But the thing is, like, I'm showing you the picture. I don't know if you could see it, but you could see where they had these two items up. It's the same things that are up after the search party came.
Right.
So that they had so many things that debunk the avalanche theory. Now,
and if you look, you can see yourself. The slope is not that bad.
Oh no, it's a very gentle slope. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very gentle slope. They never said anything about going down a hill or a mountainside or anything. They just trekked on, you know, like they were on the right path until they realized that they weren't.
Right. Well, see, what they stated is the deep snow that gets there is about 2 feet anyway, you know. So and it happens mainly from the wind because it's very windy up there. They call it the Dead Mountain. That's the Mansi term for the spot where they were at.
Now, the Mansi are the indigenous people that live there. They're kind of like, they're forest dwellers.
Yeah.
They live up in these mountains.
In extreme weather.
Year-round. This is their territory, so to speak.
But
this is an area that they know.
But they don't really go up on the Dead Mountain.
They only go in so far because of their superstitions and because of their belief in the spirits up there, because they have several spirits, so to say. You know, they got their forest spirits, their water spirits,
Yeti and whatnot.
Yeti, which they refer to as I can't think of it.
Well, anyway,
as the man from another world.
Right. And they also, but they also mentioned that the Mansis also mentioned, because they were also taken down by some of the KGB and were interrogated, is the right word for back in the Cold War time period.
they were accused at first of killing these people.
Right, but they had nothing to do with it, and they also mentioned that they had always seen glowing orbs in the sky many times up on the Dead Mountain. And they call it the Dead Mountain not because people die there, but because nothing grows up there and no animals go up to that point. There's no trees up at that point. There's no animals and no vegetation, so it's basically dead. That's why they call it the Dead Mountain. It's just extremely windy, and the snow is always kind of blowing around. But it's not an extreme slope. It's a gentle slope. So there'd be no one of their friends, Yuri, when he was reading one of the autopsies, he was upset because he said, how is a tongue missing, you know, when you got that kind of freezing temperature, and the fall that could happen from that slope is so gentle. There's nothing that could, you know, that could cause that type of fall and these injuries on that gentle of a slope. That's what he was stating. He was so upset because he was always fighting these autopsies and the military, demanding the truth and demanding this to be open because he wanted justice for his friends. And he's the one who went back, you know, on the trip because he had injured his leg and had blisters and got sick.
Right. Well, he couldn't go any further. I guess he figured, I don't know. wasn't there, couldn't read his mind, but he probably figured that he would just slow them down or,
Well,
be
the
a burden
group,
to them, so he went home.
no, the group decided as a whole that it would be best for him to go back. Now, before they headed off to the summit during that day before he went back, he went out and looked for rocks and whatnot to bring back to school. Like crystals and this, that, blah, blah, all that kind of different stuff. So he would, because they would do that. They were collecting things, different rocks and stuff to bring back to the school as well as for the trek that they were doing, and it was on their spring break. But they decided as a group that it would be best for him to go back. That it just, because he had his leg was sore and his feet were blistering and he was getting sick, so it would have been safer for him just to go back home.
Right.
And he already trekked halfway through,
Right. Yeah, he was about halfway. But the Mansi and the local people all reported seeing these lights in the sky, hearing strange noises, and all sorts of things going on at this time. They even told of meeting military patrols and holes in the hillside sealed with concrete and the sound of a train that comes from under the ground in the woods. Now, to me, that says that they had some sort of military installation up there.
Well, there was another group actually not that far from them on the same time and same days that they were up there. And in their journaling and what they were talking about, they said that they saw this thing that was flying silently and slowly from the south to the north over the ridge of the Urals, where Dyatlov's group was. And it was glowing quite brightly, and the way it illuminated over the hovering clouds. So this thing had a flight pattern to it. It wasn't just like a flare came up and going down, because a flare goes up, stays in the sky in one spot, and then it burns out and comes down. This thing, from multiple sources that I saw when I was reading documentations and everything else, stated several times around those dates that they had saw a sphere of bright light that was surrounded by like this glow of kind of like rockets. You know what I'm saying? They have that aura glow around them when they're zipping through the sky. But they didn't really know.
Right.
They didn't really have a whole lot of rockets back then, right? In 1959, when the Cold War and all that stuff was
In
kind of coming out.
1959 is when Russia and the United States got into the space program.
Yeah, but that was this happened right before that. They sent up all that stuff, but they were testing out their stuff.
But the Russian
then.
military or government was testing missiles. And one of the things that I found interesting is after the military took over the investigation, everyone present at the pass during the search had to sign a non-disclosure of information for 25 years form. And then the area was roped off from the public for 3 years.
Well, this goes with some more of what Vladimir, remember the prosecutor I was talking about, and
Right.
another prosecutor. After the last bodies were found, him and another prosecutor became extremely suspicious, and they requested a radiological analysis of the clothing of the hikers. Now,
Right.
these tests came back stating that they were higher than normal background rate, and they said that the levels they had on their garments were either from
Of
radioactive dust that dropped out of the atmosphere, and or they were exposed and contaminated to a great amount of radiation at wherever they were at. So they were exposed to a high level. Now, some of them were in the water, so some of them got some of it washed away, but they also made comments that their hairs, some of the people's hair had turned white, their skin turned an orange dark color like they were from Africa, right?
Right.
They had burns on everyone had burns on their face, and they had severe damage on some of them didn't have severe damages as the last last 4 bodies that they had found.
Yeah.
So there was just so many things that weren't adding up, and the fact that the military was making themselves present in this, they were guarding
And they got
everything.
involved
Yep.
fast.
Extremely, and they cut everybody out, and they were
Right.
basically threatening everybody. And you know how they were back then in the Cold War. They basically kill you or beat the crud out of you.
Remember that Raven mentioned about the vats of alcohol in the morgue?
Right.
The reason for those was because after everyone present in the morgue had come in contact with these bodies, that they had to soak in these vats of alcohol, because in the 1950s it was conventional knowledge that alcohol washed away radiation.
Right. And they were forced to. Everybody who
And they were forced to soak in these vats of alcohol.
Right.
Now, and another strange thing about this, since I'm on the morgue,
Right.
the medical examiner recorded that some of the bodies had livor mortis, or some people call it lividity. And what that is the settling of the blood to the lowest part of the body after death. Now, these bodies, some of these bodies had these marks on the upper side of their, on the top side of their bodies, which means that they were moved. And there were rumors that the military had gone in there, days before the official discovery of the bodies.
Right.
Someone had moved the bodies. Even a helicopter pilot said that there were 3 bodies by the tent. It was 2 men and a woman. And he claimed they were by the tent when he flew over the area. But they found them out in the woods.
No, they didn't find them in the woods. They found them from the cedar, between the cedar tree, and I'm going to bring up that picture again where it kind of shows a little bit, but, well, it doesn't. See where the footprints are? That's way down there. So that would be where the cedar tree was, and from the tent, they found them strewn up between 300 and 630 feet. You know, they were in a row. Like they were trying to make themselves way back to the tent, you know, but they didn't make it. So they weren't next to the tent, like the airplane guy said that they saw. So
that's not where they were found, but he said that that's where he saw them.
Right.
But that's not where the bodies were officially found. This same helicopter pilot also noticed bomb craters on the opposite slope of the mountain. And one of the officers that had been present there advised the next of kin to go get their pensions from the military. So that tells you right there that, you know, these people were probably killed, maybe even accidentally, by the military.
That's one theory, yeah.
And the military was going to pay the next of kin money. But,
well,
excuse me, if you stop and think about it, though, a missile range requires some infrastructure, okay? It requires roads, barracks, runways, radar sites, whatever, you know, and there were no traces of these.
But I heard that there was an underground railroad track into that mountain.
Right. Later, a rail line was discovered, though, that headed straight for a slope, like it was going to the slope. There must have been a tunnel there.
Right.
A hunter found missile debris. And then later, in the 1970s, old photographs were found that had large square clearings in the backwoods. So everything pointed, even though at the time there was no official missile range there.
Right. That was mentioned at the time, but everybody who lived there was seeing and reporting these spheres, not just in February, but also in March. But let's take a quick break right quick, all right? And then we'll come in, finish the rest of our ideas and theories on what could have possibly happened to these 9 groups of hikers. So,
well, we're gonna take a quick intermission, and for those of you listening over at Ustream, you can chat and listen with our viewers at our website. Scroll down for our URL to join in the discussion, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes.
I'm just going to wish our other host, Spooky, happy birthday. Her birthday is on Thursday on the 10th, and I just wanted to give her a little thing to let her know that we all care and want her to have an awesome birthday on Thursday.
Well, thank you.
So, the back to the part.
You promised me you wouldn't tell.
Well, I doubt I ever said promise, so that's definitely not something that I've ever said. So happy birthday, Spooky. I hope you have a wonderful one this time.
Well, thank you.
Now back to Dyatlov incident. Now, a couple of the theories that they've talked about so far was they thought the Mancines, or maybe even some of the people in their own family, had committed this murder. So they were interrogating those two people, which came out pretty quickly clear that it wasn't any of them had anything to do with it, that the tent was cut from the inside, not from the outside. The other theory was extreme natural forces, where people thought, okay, maybe there was an avalanche. Now, in the area where the tent was found, above and below it, and to the right and to the left, can't really be a discussion for any avalanche, because their specialists and mountaineers that were up at the time all said that there was not an avalanche that happened at all, from what they had seen when they were there. Now, our other theory was, well, the spheres that people were seeing in the sky. It wasn't just people from town that were seeing these. It was other hikers that were on a different part of the mountain up there that also
there were other hikers out there, and they said that they saw these spears too. In the early days of the search, after the military took over, the area was bombarded with missiles to the point that the military radioed Moscow to get it stopped. And they sat for 2 days in their tents to waiting for it to stop.
Right. Now, this is another thing. Now, if it was an avalanche, why did they have all these burns all over their bodies? Why were only some of the bodies really just smashed up and the other ones weren't? They were all in the same tent, and maybe somewhere outside and somewhere in the tent, but there's no avalanche proof because, like I said, the ski poles were still up, and then one ski, whatever you use to help get you along, they were all still up where they left it when they set the tent up. They had orange skin, and white hair. The one girl's tongue was completely missing.
Well, for one thing, and there was no recorded snowpack disturbances or full-scale avalanches.
Well, and I just said that the people.
And this is another question, okay? If it was an avalanche and an avalanche did this damage to these people,
but the specialists,
how did they hike 1.5 kilometers, which is approximately 9/10 of a mile, with injuries that are believed to have left them only 20 minutes of agonizing life?
One guy, actually, they said that he lived for a good couple hours or something. But the thing is they had avalanche specialists and mountaineers that were up there during the rescue search party, and they said above it, below it, to the right, and to the left, said that there was no sign of avalanche at all, so therefore there was no discussion of it. Plus, at the tent, if you look at this picture, it shows where the 9 hikers were digging out a spot in the snow, because like I said, the snow only kind of goes about 2 feet deep, if that, but what they were trying to do was level it out, because they were on a gentle slope, so they could kind of get their tent as flat as they could. Now, they had the ski and the ski pole in the one picture where they were digging it, and they left it, and when the search party found it, those same 2 things were still there. If there was an avalanche, those would have been knocked down.
Right.
And like I said, the specialists and avalanche specialists and mountaineers who were a part of the search party stated that it was out of discussion because all the way around it there was no proof of a avalanche. So that basically was debunked. That doesn't explain why there are still footprints leading from the tent down towards the tree line, why there was burns, why their skin turned orange, why only some of them had massive injury, right? And
they even tried to say at one time that perhaps it was a Yeti that attacked their camp. Now,
But that one dude,
I don't know
went
about
after
you,
a
but
bear. And they-
one of the guys went after a bear with a pickaxe.
Yeah, and
Do you think that they're going to take off run? For one thing, a Yeti's not going to get them all.
Right. And there was no sign of animal eating on them at all.
True. There was no sign of any animals eating on them or dragging their bodies or anything like that. And yet they, at one point, tried to say that maybe it was a Yeti. Because the Mansi believed in a Yeti. I don't think they were the ones that said it. I believe it was someone else. But a Yeti is not going to get them all. And besides that, they would have had more pronounced outside injuries.
Well, right.
These people had injuries that really were not that serious.
And like I said, we're stating our theories. We're not saying this is fact of what we
we're
think.
Stating our
when it comes to our opinions, but when it comes to documentation, everything that I read was taken from documents that they had. But we're just kind of discussing different theories and ideas. We don't know for fact. Nobody knows for fact.
Now, there was a spy theory, and the thing of it was, let's see if I can remember the names. Simeon, whatever his name is.
It's like...
Okay, he was the 37-year-old veteran. He had years of combat experience. He fought for the NKVD, which, by the way, was the Secret Service.
His name was Simon Zoltarf. And he was 37, and like I said, he was already a World War II vet. But but his friends and everything else said that
he also joined the team at the last minute.
No, actually he wasn't. His friends stated on an interview that I watched and read.
I'm just telling what the theory was.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that his friends, I'm just telling you what they stated on that theory too, that isn't factual. None of them were spies, And
let's see. They said that he fought for the NKVD, which was secret police that directly executed the rule of power of the All-Union Communist Party. Another one was Alexander Kolevatov, whatever. I knew I was going to tear the heck out of that name.
Kolevatov.
There you go. He worked in Moscow as a laboratory assistant in a top-secret scientific facility.
Alexander
and then another one, Yuri.
Worked where? Because they were all students in school, so I don't know.
I know.
They weren't talking didn't mention once that they had jobs.
This scientific facility was an unnamed atomic facility known as Post Office Box 3394. And then you had Yuri Kriminov.
George,
Shenko?
Are you talking about Are you talking about George Krivashenko?
There you go. He worked in. They said that he worked in a very notorious post office box plant.
But everything that I read and what all their friends talked about all stated that they're all in school. That there was only 2 people that were mentioned that had jobs, and none of them that you're stating had these that I saw, and from what I heard from their friends.
Right. Well, like I said, this was
just
the spy theory.
Yeah.
And they said that it was hard to believe that these 3 were together by accident, and what their
Well, it wasn't by accident. They were all friends.
What their theory was that they were carrying radioactive material to sell to the CIA, the American CIA.
But why would they meet up on the dead mountain?
I know. It seems to me that
that's one of those little far-fetched ones.
I could think of a better place to meet than in the middle of a frozen mountain with 10 feet of snow.
Well, it wasn't 10 feet. It was 2 feet to 3 feet of snow in that area. But yeah, stated that when they were there at the time measuring. But yeah, that's one of the theories that are out there. But everything that I heard from their friends, and I know that you're not saying this is what you believe. This is just something that you read. But to debunk that part, I'm going off of what their friends stated.
I know. Well, for one thing, the CIA meeting them on top of a frozen mountain or near a frozen mountain, that debunks that completely.
Right. Well,
Because
that, and you said that wasn't a chance meeting, that they knew each other.
They're not going to go to all that trouble. And besides that, why are they going to buy radioactive material from Russia when they can get it anywhere else?
Well, right. But the thing is that this person made it sound like they didn't know each other. They were all really good friends and been on several mountain expeditions.
Yes, but what made, at the time though, what made the spy theory more believable
was because it
was
the
the
Cold
fact
War
that this
back
one
then.
was a veteran of World War II. That meant nothing.
But
So he was a veteran of World War II.
Right.
Big deal.
But think of it's the Cold War back then. A lot of spy stories were coming out because that was the big thing for books and movies and radio shows or whatever was what they did back then. But that was like the thing that people loved to rile up and fearmonger into people was spies,
Spy, I know. That was the big thing back in the 50s, spy.
Right.
Everybody was a spy. It was back in the 50s when, what's his name was calling certain people in Hollywood communist.
Right. I mean, it would
and the blackballing and blacklisting and all of that back then.
Right. But what we know so far is there was radiation found on them, high levels. They had, some of them had severe injuries. One was missing their tongue, which showed no evidence of an animal ripping apart and taking off with his stuff, right? They had burns. Their skin turned orange, like almost African color. They had burns and massive injuries to them. To me, avalanches don't do that. Plus, they already, like I stated before, they had specialists and avalanche specialists that were there at the time and stated that was not factual. Also, you can see from the photo proves that it wasn't. The Manceys aren't running around burning people with, with radiation,
No.
We already have eyewitnesses, several on that same days, that they saw from the town close by, seeing something flying from the north to the south, right? And then for about 10 minutes, so it had a path. It wasn't just hovering in the sky. This one person said they saw it. It had a path over the Ural Mountains, and then it went down over the horizon, and they could, in the sky.
They also said it had a spiral motion, and that right there says missile.
Right, but back then they didn't really have rocket missile stuff so much. But, like I said, the Russians were testing a whole bunch of stuff before it came out. And the sky was still lit up behind the horizon for a long time. Another eyewitnesses talked about it being the size of the moon. The color was like a blue-white, and it had a blue aura surrounding around it. And at times the aura would flash like lightning, but it had like a red dot on the end, which to me sounds like a rocket.
But they did have missiles then, too. At the time, they had a Ural Mash plant in the area. And what that was a machine-building plant that was rumored to be making the MR-12 rocket, which was known to be tested in the area in 1955.
Well, no,
now,
we have
the missile
photo.
rocket.
Didn't you say we have a photo that you found and showed me that was on Igor Dyatlov's camera, one of the last photos that was taken.
Right.
They said that they saw this thing in the sky, which was glowing and it was orange that same night, and it's like his camera was on a tripod and it had captured this thing in the sky. So that still goes with.
But to me, that looks like a flare.
Well,
personally,
a flare goes up, it stays in the sky, then it burns out. It's in one spot. These people, eyewitnesses, other hikers on that same mountain, just a little bit further away from him, saw something going from the north to the south over the Ural Mountains. It had a flight pattern. It wasn't like.
Right. It had a flight pattern. Missiles have a flight pattern.
Flares don't. Flares go in the sky. They stay there until they burn out. They hover in one spot.
This plant that was known to be in the area, they shut down their missile and rocket division in 1963. That was the same year the region was reopened to tourists, because after they found these bodies,
they barred everybody.
They closed down the area
access
to all tourists for 3 years.
Not just tourists, to anybody. They wouldn't let anybody up there for 3 years.
To the public, to everybody for 3 years.
The military did
And then
that.
when this plant closes down, or this one division in this plant closes down in 1963, they turn around and reopen the area back to the public. Don't you think that's a little strange?
Yeah, I'm thinking cleanup, you know, just
Right.
covering up their tracks and stuff. And someone had mentioned, do you think that the bodies could have been moved where they were and died somewhere else? You know, I don't know. We don't know. We're just going off of the documents that are.
Well, the medical
Are
examiner
out.
said that some of the bodies had livor mortis on the front. Now, these are marks that only form on the lowest part of the body.
Right.
That would be the body closest to the ground. And indicating, and he also wrote, it indicated that the bodies had been turned over after death. Now, it takes, excuse me, this process begins 20 minutes to 3 hours after death. Okay? And for it to reach maximum, that's 6 to 12 hours. And this is also determined, and for those that don't know, I used to be a medical examiner. But this is used to not only determine time of death, it's also used to determine if a body has been moved. And the medical examiner recorded that the bodies had this on the front. So these people, at some point, when they died, they were laying face down. But somebody moved them. And there was rumors that the military had gone in there and moved the bodies before the official report that the bodies had been found.
Right. Well, the thing is, so this makes me wonder, okay, now let's say there were tests being conducted for like new type of weapons up in that area, because it's basically a dead mountain. There's nothing ever really
Right.
up there.
There's no animals, no people living up after a certain elevation or anything.
Right.
It's basically, except for the trees, it's basically a barren wasteland.
So let's say like two people were still outside and partially dressed, you know, but still dressed. That's why some of them, a couple of them had their clothing on. But let's just have, this is a theory. Let's say there's two people that were still outside when it happened and they were dressed, while everyone else was in the tent. Now something caused some type of shockwave and or explosion, like, right? And it caused the people outside, could have been thrown against something, which could have caused some of the injuries, right? This is just
Right.
theories. I'm not saying this is factual, right? We're just throwing things out there. And then those that were in the tent were told to flee. That would be why they sliced it from the inside haphazardly and just took off without grabbing, because they had all their stuff right there on top of the packs. They could have grabbed those clothes folded up. They could have grabbed their shoes right there on the side. They didn't. They took off and
That's
ran.
what I say. Something scared them so bad
That they would
that they
flood the
knew
tent.
they were in imminent danger, and they just cut their way out of that tent.
But those who were fleeing the tent doesn't mean they may have ran, but they could have went, you know, hurriedly down, right? They could have picked up the ones that were outside who got wounded, and they all headed down towards the tree. Now, they could have all been together at one point, right? And then some of them may have decided to head back up to
But some of them did live for a while. They made it down by that water, and they
well,
dug.
some of them survived up to 8 hours.
Yeah,
So-
they
so
dug
it said
that
for the
that
autopsies.
that trench like or hole like. They even laid cedar branches down to minimize the contact between them and the snow.
The biggest thing that throws a red flag up for me is that the government did not want the investigation to get too close to the truth. They're still to this day pressuring people and keeping the case closed, and they're not even letting out all the documentation when they finally did let some things out. And
Oh,
why
yeah.
were the KGB at the morgue, and why were they, you know, not allowing the normal people who work there access to these bodies if they just died from hypothermia and it was nothing, if it was just avalanche or this or whatever. I mean, there was a huge ordeal when it came with it.
Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Communist Soviet Union at the time, he wanted this case dismissed.
And also
he wanted it closed.
Right.
He said that he was convinced that they died of hypothermia.
Some of them did.
Now,
because there was...
So on May 28th of 1959, they dismissed the case. They were ordered... dismissal of the case was ordered, so the investigation was wrapped up, and their official conclusion was the cause of death of the tourists was an elemental force that they were in no state to overcome. What was the elemental force? Personally, I think it was a shock wave from an atomic blast.
Yeah.
I think they were testing something up there that had to me, after reading the medical examiner's report and everything,
the part that we could read, they're still not
the
letting
part that
them
we
all
could
out.
read,
right?
It still said, and witnesses' descriptions of the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing
well,
that
not
you
just
can
that. They were
say is that they were hit by some sort of shock wave.
But the fact that the military was so adamant about they didn't want the funeral to happen. They were trying to keep the funeral little to be known at all. Didn't want even people showing up. Wanted to bury them on their own. But they said, no, we want our family and friends back because we want to put them where we are close to our loved ones. You know, they had high level of radiation on them. They had burns on them. They had discolored skin and hair. The fact that the KGB was extremely present throughout the whole investigation. The fact that...
Not to mention that everyone present at the pass during that time were forced to sign a non-information disclosure for 25 years.
Or the fact that they banned access to the whole area for over 3 years. Complete access.
Until this one division of this plant that was known to be in the area, and that wasn't a rumor, that plant was there. When they closed down a certain division in that plant, all of a sudden the area was open to tourists, to the public again.
There's just if there wasn't some type of involvement that the military had in it, they wouldn't have been doing all of the things that they were doing. You know, and the fact that several military people and other people that were prosecutors and stuff that were involved with the investigation and the morgue knew that things was not right, and they did their own stuff and sent out, for the radiological testing, and then that they even stated that there's something afoul here, big time.
You know
now,
what?
But those people, listen, although most of those people that were involved in this and were questioning were fired and or taken care of, except for Vladimir. He was really only the one left that he didn't lose his job. Because he wasn't really pushing himself out there questioning as much as these other ones were and getting all these tests done on their own, and they were kind of taken care of. But there's just too much. Basically, to me, it seems like they were in the wrong spot at the wrong time,
Right.
And they just died.
And I believe that.
Horrific, because like I stated before when I was talking about each of their characters, they were extremely athletic, very great people, fun-loving. They all got along. They were optimistic, loved life. They loved helping other people. And they dealt in.
I think if the military had stayed out of it, it probably wouldn't have grown into the mystery that it is. It probably would have died out pretty soon.
It would have never died out. It stayed big as it is because there's no explanation for these bodies being in the state that they are. What happened to them? So the fact that there's no answers makes it a huge thing. That's why it's still 39 years later, these people in Russia and all over the world are still pushing to have this case reopened and re-examined and the truth come out. Now, Yuri Yudin, the one who turned back, he just died in April of last year. So he never got to see the truth come out and his friends, deaths vindicated, I guess, if that's what I want to say. But
and he dug into this for years. He
Oh,
probably dug into it
all the
just
way up to
about all of
death.
his life.
All the way up to his death, he never stopped. You know, I saw interviews and documents that he was on, and I got a lot of the stuff that I talked about earlier in the show tonight from him directly, and seen interviews from that happened at the time from Vladimir and people who were there and eyewitnesses that were at the everything, and stating that there's a big cover-up. You know, things aren't being said. It's been so long. Why can't they just come out and say, yes, we did this? You know, this is ridiculous. You know, they just want the truth. Why that?
Because Russia has always been known for denying everything they do, and for denying, they even now, they have nuclear weapons now that they deny exist. It's always with them, it's always been deny, deny, deny.
Well, and also, why was it Alexander Kolevatov's diary, camera, and the group's diary never made public, but they let the other ones be public? And he was the one known to take great detail of all information. Why wouldn't they let his stuff be known to the public? Why are there some missing documents to this day? There's things that don't add up in so many factors, you know. And I don't know. You know, people like come up with the Yeti theory, but I don't think Yeti has the capability.
Well, there
of
was also an
radiation
occult side of it too. Like the Mansi said that the students somehow upset the spirits, and the spirits got revenge. You know, I mean, they always talked about evil spirits and gates to another world, and even the secret police and the KGB had occult divisions. But, and the Mansi told of not the Mansi, there was a record of 3 privates who went insane and were discharged. And the reason for that is they met themselves coming up a hill.
Well, yeah.
That was the reason given.
Yeah,
I don't know
look,
if it's true or not. That would probably
they
drive
also
me crazy too.
They also had theories of UFOs, but you know what is a
Theories
UFO?
of UFOs.
A UFO is unidentified flying object. Now, there was objects seen by people in the town nearby by Evdal. There was also people on the mountain a little bit further from them that was seeing things fly through the sky. You know, that wasn't... I mean, everybody knows what a flare is, right? So they wouldn't...
Right.
Flares don't have a flight pattern and fly from, you know, one direction to the other for 10 minutes. They go up in the air, they stay in one place so people know, hey, someone's in danger and need help, go here, and then they burn out and
But a
fall down.
UFO could have been anything, you know. I mean, a UFO is like an unidentified flying object. Doesn't mean it's a spacecraft and aliens. But a spacecraft was part of it.
Right.
Part of the theory, you
Right,
know. But
aliens and UFOs.
aliens and stuff like that. But but the thing about that one is
It's kind of a little far-fetched, really, because
that is far-fetched because
I'm not
I
saying
mean,
that there isn't life on other planets, but I mean, just to really bring it down to it, to me, I really believe that it's more something that earthly.
Well, you would think that if a flying saucer came down with all the radiation that comes off of that, there would have been a hole burnt in the snow, would have been melted somewhere, wouldn't you?
Somebody had mentioned on the search party, when they first part went up, before they had the 40 with the police, military there, the other students and professional avalanche hikers and whatnot coming up, they had stated that they had looked farther on one side of the mountain. They had seen melted snow, and it looked like something had happened over there, but it wasn't where, you know, there was no avalanche triggered in the part where they were at, you know, and
Yeah.
and the photos prove it, really. So that theory is basically debunked. But the shape that their body was in, the burns, the discolored skin, the fact that the military had so much involvement in trying to cover this up or keep people out of it, it just, to me, my belief, not saying that this is what it is, but my belief, I believe that they had some form of involvement when it came to these 9 hiker stuffs.
Gloomy wants to know if there are any books on this. I only know of some
there is.
Russian books. I don't know about any American.
Yes, I know some books, and I'm going to post the links up in our show archives, when I upload the show, I'm going to slap up the links to a good couple of books, plus Richard or Penny, could you drop in the link to a site where this one person did an extremely thorough job at finding all the photos out there, showing the autopsy reports, you know, and different people's interviews and everything else. It's all there. So Richard or Penny, if you guys drop the link in the chat room for those guys so they could check it out later after the show, I'll also post it up in our show archive section, and I will also post links to a couple of these books. But it's an amazing and tragic story, really, you know. And it's just sad that these 9 people died the way that they did, being so young, and you know how they were just amazing people, were always there for everybody. They were just great souls, to just die a tragic, messed up way, you know.
Now, in the first hour, I noticed somebody in chat made the statement, and I think it was crazy. Said something about there were 3 sets of 9 people that died on this mountain. Well, the Mansi do have a legend of 9 warriors that died there.
Well, they
and
got
there
it from
was
that
also
photo.
a rumor of a plane crash and 9 people died, but I have not been able to find anything on that plane crash.
Yeah, well, the thing is there was a photo that I showed up that I kind of borrowed from someone, and I'm going to give him credit later on a link from in our show archive where we got that guy's photo from. But it was this one, and he stated that he found this somewhere. I couldn't find it anywhere. I didn't see any mention of it. But I was showing like where the tent was, where the supply box was, and where they were at, and how how off they were from the summit of where they were supposed to be. You know, it's just a quick picture. Now this guy mentioned this stuff. I didn't see anywhere where it mentioned a plane crash in the 90s. So that's one person's theory, but the reason why
it was supposed to have been like 1991, and I found things about plane crashes after 1991, but I never found anything about a plane crash in the Ural Mountains where 9 people died. I did, however, find about plane crashes near the Ural Mountains, but you know, there was either less than 9 or more than 9, so I don't know anything about the rumor of 3 sets of 9 people dying.
Right. But the fact is, all of these people were in great health. They were athletic, strong hikers, and been on several mountain treks. So they knew what they were doing, and they're used to being in minus 30 to minus 50 degree weather. I mean, they grew up in this type of environments, you know, and it's not like nowadays. I mean, back in the 50s, that was some serious hiking. That's not just some little hobby. That's just, like I said,
it's
a
not
way
like
of
it
living.
is now, which it's no, I mean, don't get me wrong.
It's still hard out there, but yeah.
It's still hard, but it's not as hard now as it was back then. And back then, it was almost a way of life, especially in that area, because that area had snow most of the year.
Yeah, in May. This was on their spring break. I mean, to me, that spring break's like still middle of winter when it's minus 30 and minus 50, and to them, they're like, woohoo, this is awesome, let's go on spring break.
Yeah, and this is our Daytona Beach.
Right, and they've done this several times, you know, so, and like I said, that they weren't frightened easy. They were always there to help somebody in need if something happened on several different hikes. Like I said, Ludmila Dubin, she had hurt herself majorly on one hike, and she was, in excruciating pain, but all the other hikers that were not dragging her, but hiking her down the mountain on a stretcher were so impressed that she was encouraging them to keep going on, and they were in distress. These other people were kind of like worried and freaking out, and she was just like, it's no big deal, I got it, So the fact that she had massive injury and she wasn't, bothered by it shows to me that she had a really strong, spirit. So
she had a high tolerance to pain.
Right, and she was actually one of the ones who had the worst conditions. She was the one who was missing the tongue and the crushed chest, and eyes and everything, and it's just like, so it's like, even if something temporarily happened, all of these people wouldn't really panic if it was over nothing. You know, there was something that seriously happened to frighten them, and that caused
they
these
were.
things.
It was almost like they were scared out of their minds.
Right.
They didn't know what was happening.
And I'm wondering,
and I
like,
wonder if, and I think that at least some of them saw what was coming at them.
that's what I'm wondering. And what if there was some type of blast? Maybe it happened a little bit above in the atmosphere, which could cause some. Because they also talked about finding metal pieces to rockets or something like up in the mountain later on. But what if they were blinded by a blast? That could, and maybe they were. That could have explained why they couldn't really find the tent or something right directly, you know, or whatever, you know.
Right.
It's just.
But the people that were in the back of the tent, because that was not a small tent. I mean, that was a tent that was big enough for all of them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So some
And
of them
their
had to be
gear. And
so
their
far
gear
back in the tent that they
and a
had no
furnace.
choice. They had no choice but to cut themselves out of it.
Well, I have a picture of the tent where you see it on another part of their trek, where you could see it's a good length, and you know, and that it fits all of them, all of their gear, because they laid on their backpacks, and their clothing was laid out on top of the backpacks because it's cold, so you're constantly.
I know. The only thing I
around.
can't understand is some of them left. They were in their underwear. They were in bare feet. I don't know about you, but if I'm in sub-zero weather, I'm not getting undressed. These people had to really, really be used to cold weather.
Well, it's not that, but they had a huge furnace in there, and they kind of made it like where it steamed in there, so it was really pretty warm in their tent. It was, you know, there's certain ways that they, you know, it's almost like a little house with a fire, you know what I mean? So it gets pretty warm, and then the only part of you that really gets cold is the part that's laying on or touching the ground.
Well,
part.
canvas does hold in the heat. I mean, it gets hot in a canvas tent when you got a heat source in there.
But like I said, you know, some of them were just getting ready to sleep. They're in long johns and undershirts.
Plus,
and
they weren't
everything else.
expecting to have to leave that tent in a hurry either.
Right. And that's the thing. It's just, to me, my opinion and what I believe is, I believe that the military had some form in it. I think they stumbled onto a testing ground or testing area, and, you know, something blew up above them in that area, right, which caused these type of things. And maybe there was military up there before the original search party found them and moved the bodies somewhat, and were trying to pick up and get rid of any trace evidence. I mean, why was the KGB so...
Some of the bodies were found in such a position that it looked like they were trying to make their way back to the tent.
Most of them were. I mean, they go, like I said, they go more in detail of this, which you guys can find out later when you can read some of the books that are out there, and also that one web link that Richard and Penny will drop into chat again. This person went into a far more detail than what we can, because there's way more pictures out there. We couldn't show them all. We couldn't, you know, we can't go through every single detail and documentation.
Oh, there
that's
were
out there
tons of pictures.
Yeah, but in the documentation and everything that's out there in great detail, I wouldn't have enough time to do it in 2 hours. So I definitely wanted to, you know, get their names out there, get out what their characters were, to, you know, to let people know that these were great guys. They knew what they were doing. They have experience. They weren't just, you know, starting out of some little hobby. They've been doing this for a long time, you know, and they knew how to take care of themselves in extreme cold weather. And they weren't panicked or distressed real easily. You know, like I said, one guy went after a bear.
But something scared them enough that they ran almost a mile. 9/10 of a mile. Might as well say they ran a mile. Crazy is right. The movie Devil's Pass is based on this mystery.
No, it's not based on the whole truth. The 7 Americans go out and retrace these 9 hikers' trek to try to see if they can solve the mystery. Now, it is a movie, so there is, you know, it's all the story's all hyped up and changed, and these these 7 Americans have their own crazy experience. But I did love the ending of that movie because it takes a twist in something that I've never seen my own, and And they bring up the fact of the underground military base that is under that mountain where the train ran into, and it shows it in that movie. Now, they don't portray the story 100% of like what we're talking about, but it is an interesting movie. But there is a good couple books out there, and I'm going to post them later in our show.
And who's to say that the information we found is true?
Well, not everything we found is true, but the fact that I watched, and I'm going to post a link to an actual Russian documentary where they interviewed these people that I talked about tonight, the friends that were Yudin, and the couple of the people that did go on the original search party and on the second one. They were in there, had an interview. Vladimir, he was in there interviewing, and they were doing. They were showing the true documents right there, and they showed all the documents on the film. They were reading them so you could see them. So there's this film that I'm talking about, or the stuff that I was talking about, and as far as the diary entries and everything else, all that stuff was factual, taken from the documentations and from people that were there. But as far as the other stuff that we're talking about, yeah, I don't know.
Moose has a good point. Why not just burn the bodies or get rid of them altogether?
We actually thought, we were talking a little bit about that too. There's just so many things that just don't add up. But the fact that the military had a huge presence in all of this, from their funeral to the morgue to not making some of the diaries and film public.
Plus, there was the rumor that the military was out there before the official search party was out there.
Right. I mean, I read up on this for like weeks and just kept going and reading so many different times about it, and it's just so in depth, and there's just so many different things that are just unexplainable. It's just, and that's why it's still a mystery today, up to what, 38, 39 years, and why people are still forcing the government to reopen this case. It
seems to me though that if the military was out there before the official search for these people,
well, they did say
they would have gotten rid of the bodies, that they would have gotten rid of everything, and they could say that, well, there was a blizzard or something that night because there was high winds and blowing snow. They fell in a crevice or something, and they just disappeared.
But that doesn't explain. I mean, also, they had some of their friends come and check out some of the items, and some of the items that they said that they saw up there was some skis that didn't belong to anybody there.
Right.
There was some goggles or glasses or whatever they were that didn't go with anybody's gear that they had up there.
Right.
And then they also mentioned that
it just seems to me that
if
they were up there, that they just made matters worse.
Yeah, but there was a torn swath of the fabric that didn't resemble, that kind of like resembled a piece of a soldier's coat also. There was items there that did not belong to anybody in the group that Yudin mentioned, like saying, "Hey, whose are these? This doesn't belong to." And he was part of the group, so he knew everybody's stuff. They were all friends the whole time, so they did discover some stuff that did not belong there, so it's like we said, this is a huge mystery.
Tells you that somebody was there
right
before the searchers got there.
Well, we don't know. I mean, it alludes to. We can't say.
It alludes to it, right.
But
to me, it just seems to make it worse, make the mystery worse.
Well, to me, the fact that the government was just so adamant.
I know. When they got in there, they literally took over the investigation.
They fired people. They interrogated, threatened, and harassed people. They tried to stop the funerals and keep the bodies.
I know, to even stop the funerals.
Right.
Let the family have the bodies. Let them have closure. But they even tried to stop that.
Right.
If it hadn't been for the families, there's no telling what they would have done with those bodies. Just to get rid of them so nobody would see them. But these people had such horrendous internal injuries. From what I read, some of them had to die almost instantly once that shockwave hit them.
And the fact that there's so many people that are pushing for the truth to come out, and that the government, literally is trying to stop any traces of the full truth to come out. That they were doing all these different things. And you would think
after, 50 years? It's been over 50 years, maybe? that
No, not
they
50
would just,
years. It's been like, what, 38 or 39, I think.
but even after all this time, you would think that now that and I'm not trying to play it down, but after all this time, what would it matter for the truth to finally come out? Why would it matter? We knew at the time that Russia was developing atomic weapons. We knew that they were in the space race with the United States. We knew they were testing missiles. They do that stuff today.
Right.
So why not just let it out? Night, Gloomy.
Well, like I'm saying, is, there's so many things that just don't add up. And like we said, anybody else who's really kind of intrigued by this, we're going to have links up to a couple of different sites, and a few books are out there. I'm going to post a link to the Russian documentary that I saw, where they're showing the real documents, the photos, an interview with the people who were in the search party and their actual friends, and Yuri, who was the sole hiker that lived because he turned around because of, The weird thing is that there were so many things during their trek before they reached the summit where something was trying to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, from one guy being arrested, another person, these school children begging.
I know, there were kind of red flags, so to speak.
But you can't really...
just trying to keep them from going out there, it seemed. Yeah. The unfriendly locals, the guy getting arrested.
For singing,
For singing, the guy getting sick. That it just seems to me...
The school children begging Xena to stay.
Right.
And then, there's just a couple of them got hurt a little bit from, when they were in that one last town that, was inhabited, really. They got hurt by nails and whatnot, but there were so many things that were trying to deter them a little bit to not really complete this mission.
You would think that one of them would have that little voice that would say, well, maybe we should turn back not go at all.
But it makes me wonder if they did... if some of them did have those thoughts. Obviously Yuri did, and he turned around. But I just think if maybe he wasn't released from the jail and was kept longer, he couldn't finish the trek, and he missed him by a day or two. The other Yuri K would still be alive. Or if Xena stayed with the school children and decided to do that and didn't go on, she'd still be alive.
Or maybe if one or two of them went back with Yuri, so he wouldn't go back alone, because, he had quite a trip to go back home, because he was out, they were in this isolated village when he turned around and left, and he had a very long trip by himself.
Well, and not too long.
And if he was sick, it just surprises me that they would have let him go back alone.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They were all pretty strong endurance and everything else. So, but Evdel was not that far from the town of where the abandoned town of where they were at,
Right.
So it's just so many things that make you think. There's just so many questions and so many things. It's like, okay, maybe it was this, but then there's so many things that debunk that just from photos and documentations and the autopsy. Then you think, okay, maybe it's this, but it just, so many things don't add up for every different theory that's out there. But the only thing that, for me, for my opinion, I'm not stating that this is fact, but from my opinion, I believe that the military had some form of involvement in this. And I don't think that their deaths were on purpose. It may have been accidental, that they were in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Maybe the military was testing secret weapons that weren't known. Because
there's so much to debunk the other theories. I mean, the other theories really don't hold water. The only one that really holds water is the fact that it is the one about the military out there testing missiles and rockets and bombs and stuff, secret weapons. But why the cover-up? After all these years, why the cover-up? Why don't they just come right out?
Why not release all the documents? Why only release some and still keep some of them hidden in photos?
Yeah, because most of the people involved in this, the families and the friends and stuff, most of them are gone anyway.
Yeah, but it's not just them. It's the towns and everybody else. They're still angered by this situation, and they still want resolution, and they want the truth to come out, and they want this case reopened. It's a huge ordeal over there, and they're even asking for other people in other countries to join in to pressure the military to reopen this case and to release all the documentations and just say it for what it is, unless there's something bigger than just testing a weapon.
And why the cover-up anyway? I mean, back then in the 1950s, they could have said, you don't say nothing. If you say something, you die, because that's usually the way it went anyway. All they had to do is tell them, you keep your mouth shut.
Yeah,
you know, you don't say nothing, you don't investigate nothing, you write this down.
But that's not just
we're talking
then,
about the 1950s when communism was really had a hold on Russia.
Well, it's not just that, but that's how all of governments are to this day. They still do that, and they're still shady and do stuff and take out people if they're stopping their agendas and everything else. It's just not back there, and it's just a constant thing when it comes to that type of stuff.
Nikita Khrushchev was in charge then. I mean, that man had an iron fist on Russia. What he said went. I mean, he was the epitome of communism. And they're still doing a cover-up.
Right. Well, the people in the towns and the surrounding areas, they really cared about what happened to these people, that they put a plaque up on the mountain. They changed the name of the original mountain's name to the leader of the group's last name, which is, Igor Dyatlov's. So it's called the Dyatlov Pass, where it used to be called the Dead Mountain, but now it's named after him because they're honoring these nine hikers and what happened to them, and they have in the cemetery this huge, display with their pictures and their names on it, and every year on the incident they go out and light candles and sing songs and celebrate these 9 people's lives, even up to this day. So it shows you how important it is to them that the truth needs to come out. And they, I'm thinking that they also believe that the military does have a hand in this, and they just want the truth to come out, and they want just to put this to rest, And it's just, this is to me one of the most craziest stories I've ever come across, and seriously tragic and sad at the same time, there's just so many things that don't add up. But what if the reason why they don't release the rest of the documentation is because it's attached to something far bigger that deals with more, a government facility that they have that they're still using to this day, kind of like, well, we have Area 51 and stuff. Maybe they have something like that over there, and that's why they can't let certain comes out, because it's going to...
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, who is it going to hurt in the government? Because everybody that was involved in this, all the government officials that were involved in this are all dead. So what's it going to hurt them?
Well, I don't know if they're all dead, but I mean, I can't state for a fact.
I would just about bet most of them were, if you stop and think about their ages at the time and what they would be now. But, well, maybe not all of them are dead. Khrushchev's is dead, I mean...
Yeah, I can't state the fact that all of them are dead or nobody's still around, because there are still people around, in different parts of involvement when it came to this.
Oh, and I'm sure these people still have family alive, but, the family wants to know what happened.
Well, yeah,
what happened to their family. Mm-hmm. And I think they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think maybe they got caught in something accidentally and it killed them, but the government went in and covered it up, because they didn't want anyone to know what was going on that mountain. There were people, the local people, the Mansi, and even other hikers out there saw these things in the sky.
Right.
They all saw this. It had been going on for a while. And so you have their word that this was taking place. And I don't think the indigenous people of the area are going to lie about seeing this, although a lot of them were superstitious and may have thought they were something else than what it really was.
They thought it was the Yeti coming from another world. That's what they said, because they didn't, these people weren't connected to towns and everything else. They lived as far off as where they could get, but they still lived in the tree lines that were still there, but weren't as high up over that mountain, because they didn't go to that mountain. That was the Mountain of the Dead, and just they always saw things flying around there.
The reason it was called the
that.
Mountain of the Dead is because no animals lived there.
No, I know that.
No people lived there. After a certain elevation, nothing lived there except trees.
Well, sort of. They were a little bit down towards the bottom in the valley part. And it was sparse trees, not like a thick
Well, it wasn't
bunch.
heavily forested or anything, but it's like anything else, just like the Rocky Mountains, you get up so far, you don't even have trees up there. But it just, everything points toward the military.
Or some form of involvement anyway.
Right. Whether it was an intentional or accident.
If it wasn't them, some other type of military activity may have happened from somebody else, and they're covering up. Some people are like, oh, UFO blew up there, and therefore the military came and was picking it up and doing all that stuff. Like I said, there's so many different theories, but, for sure I agree with you.
Well, for sure the military was involved. They're the ones that when they came in force. They took over the entire investigation, and they put down what they wanted the official report to be. Nikita Khrushchev pushed to have this case closed, and it was.
Yeah. Well, the other hikers, like I said, they weren't exactly near them. They were further on a different path. But they did see these things flying through the sky for 10 minutes.
Yes,
Someone's making a comment, but I don't think the military were there killing people physically, like hand-to-hand combat. I think that they were testing something. I don't think it was on purpose. No, I think they were testing something, and these, the Dyatlov hikers, the group, were just at the wrong spot.
Place at the wrong time.
Yep,
and they got caught in it.
Right. And like I said, if it was anything else that was just the basic elements or, animals or what have you, they have already experienced this stuff. They're not easily scared off. They're extremely athletic and strong and willed and, knew how to take care of all this stuff. So they wouldn't have panicked and fled if that was all of it. And also, like I said, they had avalanche specialists and mountaineers that were up there that were part of the search party, and they like I said, they looked above, below, to the right and to the left, and they said there was no reason to discuss the theory of an avalanche because it did not happen. And like you said, when you go and look at these different photos and you look at their tents, it proves that the skis that they had put up, and the ski pole was still up.
An avalanche would have knocked all that stuff down.
It would have covered it all. They would have all been covered.
Yeah, it would have covered it. It would have knocked some of it down, and they would have found it down the mountain.
But an avalanche is not fire. It's not lava. It's not going to burn these people's skin, turn them orange, and turn their hair gray either.
That's true. It's not. But I'm talking mainly about the tent and the skis that were still sticking in the snow and everything.
Right.
An avalanche would have covered that. Some of it would have went down the mountain. They wouldn't have found everything right there at the camp like they did. The only thing that they didn't find at the camp were the bodies.
Right. Well,
they had ran to the forest line.
Right. Well, like I said, we're gonna post a link later on in the show archives where you can, and Richard and Penny will drop a link in right quick again. But I'm gonna post a link for the books, to a couple websites, to the Russian document, and then also put our show up in podcast later for those of you who missed the beginning part of it. But I'm just going to say their names right quick, and then we're going to tell you what our next week's show is, and we're going to close out. But I just want to say their names again right quick for a tribute to them, for these 9 people who died in a sad, tragic way, and hopefully their mystery will be solved and the truth will come out. But there was Igor Dyatlov, Zinda Kulmagorov, Yuri George Krivashenko, Seaman Zoltorv, Yuri Yurdin, who was the one who went home, but still, he's included in this tragedy because he lost all his friends. You have Alex Kalatov, that one's a hard word to say, I apologize. Rustam Slobodin, Nikolai Tebo Brignoles, Yuri Dorshenko, and Ludmil Dubin. Hopefully their stories the truth will come out, and may they rest in peace.
Next week, we are going to talk about the JFK assassination conspiracy and Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, and our guest is going to be Penny Dias. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I would like to thank our mods, Richard and Penny and Crazy Guy, and please join us next week. Feel free to share us on Facebook and join in the discussion on our forums.
Yep, and happy birthday to Spooky on Thursday. And thank you everyone who came, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you everyone, and have a great week.